Hi, everyone. It is my distinct honor to bring Joe McNulty of McNulty Accountants and Business Consultants. He's here to talk about the analytics of tax success in professional sports. And without further ado, here's Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the MIT Sports Conference for inviting me again. I really appreciate it. This is my third speech, and this is a topic that's become a little bit dear to my heart, and I would want to start a little bit giving you my background and the evolution of my career so you can kind of see a little bit of why this has become a passion. I'm a former student athlete. I never played professional sports, but I spent a lot of time in college and got myself through college playing sports. But in all my time, I've been a big supporter of sports. I'm a big sports fan. And the other passion I have is music. My career began at the firm formerly known as Arthur Andersen, which became Andersen, which now becomes nothing. And it is no longer existent, but the memories are still there for all of us. And one of the things I experienced is my career as a CPA and a tax is probably when people, and especially students, would think, well, I want to be an accountant. It's the worst image anybody could ever have. Usually skinny, not me, okay? And wear glasses, not anymore. And a lot of not college athletes go into accounting. And the other thing is my other passion was I was a drummer. And my drumming was never good enough. I was a little bit of a hack. But over the term of my career, I became attracted to my interest and hobbies. My practice now is composed of entertainers, drummers, and professional athletes. And I spent a lot of time reviewing what happens. And in 1984, which is now 30 years ago, one of my clients came up to me, and he was a professional drummer, and his name was Mick Fleetwood, and he was with the rock group Fleetwood Mac. And he walked in my office, and he said, I was younger, much younger then, maybe in my late 20s, and he says, I don't understand. I am a professional drummer. I'm in the lead player and one of the leaders and founders of Fleetwood Mac, and I just filed bankruptcy. How in the hell did that happen? Okay? So I said, and most people and most consumers sit back and say, how does somebody with that much professional success go bankrupt? And so I spent a lot of time thinking, well, let's take a look. I knew nothing about the music business from a business point of view, and I took a look at it, and I said, why did this happen? Well, because the individual has to pay state tax in everywhere they perform. They have a manager, an agent, a business manager. So this turns out to be that when it comes down to the net, how much do these professional drummers really make? And how much these professional athletes make? So I've done some exhibits here, which are kind of interesting. How do I switch this? This? It will not blow up, I don't think. It won't, if you don't know how you work this. There it goes. Okay, there's one. Now this is an interesting, Mick Fleetwood from Fleetwood Mac, in 1984, after selling 40 million albums, went bankrupt 2 years after the release of the album. Unbelievable. No one could actually explain it. And then you look, I was going online, I was looking, how many professional athletes have gone bankrupt? And this was taken from Sports Illustrated, this slide. And you look at some of these names, and I know some of the people on this list, and I signed some of their payroll checks, and those were very, very long payroll checks. Allen Iverson, one of the greatest basketball players. Antoine Walker. Then I go on, and I look down at the list, Leon Spinks. Well, at one time, he was considered one of the highest net worth athletes. And it became me to more to drill down and see what kind of responsibilities and how we could do with professional athletes and musicians. So the next slide that I had, I just wanted to show everybody how much do these people make? Athletes, musicians, and entertainers. How much do they really make? Next slide. So what I did is I took 3 scenarios. I took a California NBA player that is a #1 draft pick, and I took his comparative between an actor and a a musician in California. And I won't get into too much details on the tax calculations, and anybody that's going to go and see an audit and do a blue ticket, these are estimates, so these have been gone, but they're fairly within 10%, plus or minus standard deviation. So the first number one draft pick in the NBA in 2014 on a par would get approximately $4.5 million. He would pay federal income taxes of approximately $1.4 million, state income taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and then he would after taxes, roughly $2.6 million. Then out of that, he has to pay his agent. Okay, we used 4% for this particular agent. I know agents have a lot of different ways of getting paid, so this is a standard. And then if they had a business manager, someone that was managing the money and finances, they'd pay close to 5%. Well, the NBA player roughly would receive 48% of his gross pay in net cash, or approximately roughly $2.2 million per year. So you say, that's very easy. He buys a new house for a couple of years for $5 million. He has no savings. It's very tough for these guys to live, okay? And so what we've started doing, and I want to just go through the actor because there's a little bit of differences in taxation issues and for some practitioners, because with an NBA player as well as an actor are subject to collective bargaining agreements, and they must withhold. The actor has a little leniency on that in the fact that they could loan out their services to a loan-out corporation to try to get more tax benefits. But on a whole, they are required to withhold, both by an NBA player and an actor. A musician, there's no union. They can't organize themselves. There's a musician's union, but that's for studio work. But the musician gets a little more advantages in the fact that they're not subject to W-2. But as you can see with the California actor and the musician, they have a lot more operating costs. They have an agent, a business manager, and a manager. But if you look at the California actor, that's an actor living in the state of California, they roughly net cash out of $4.5 million in salary and wages that they would receive from film or television. They would only net 1.25% of their check, roughly 27% of their net income, so of their gross income. The musician does quite a little better in the fact that because he is not subject to the W-2 employment, and he was roughly at 37%. So the idea that when a professional athlete or an entertainer, it is very important for them to manage their money throughout the time of their career. If they have a 10-year career or a 20-year career at the best, you could see maybe $40 million, which a lot of people in the room would say that's a tremendous amount of money. But when the lifestyle is required to push up, it's very difficult for these people to manage their finances. And that's why you see a tremendous, Sports Illustrated, which I can't believe, says that 60% of the NBA stars have financial difficulties upon retirement. The NFL was even higher, at close to 75 to 80%. Now, the truth of that, well, probably financial difficulties after career, because your career is so short, and finding some other way to save money is extremely essential. So we spend a lot of time focusing on what could really help entertainers and athletes. And our focus has been, how do we reduce the tax liability? What do we do? Well, for an NBA star or somebody in a professional athlete that's subject to a collective bargaining agreement, you're dealing with the constraints of a W-2 employee. So, but you have to manage. And we've seen a lot of people, a lot of players, and you've seen a lot of golfers, and you see a lot of people saying, let's get out of the state of California. It's the highest tax rate in the state. Let's go to tax-free states. Let's move to where we can start saving income. And that has become an essential part of negotiation. On 4 separate times this year, our firm has been asked by professional athletic teams to do an analysis, and one of them runs this concert, to do analysis to show why a person shouldn't play in a state taxable, a state that has income taxes versus a state that doesn't have income taxes, such as Daryl Morey's Houston Rockets are in Texas. There's California teams that have significant players. So what we did is we created a template for players and agents that could, how much more would you earn if you moved from a state such as New York, California, and we use California in this particular example, to Texas or Florida, which does not have an income tax. Now, for people that don't understand, that doesn't get you totally out of state income taxes because players are still subject to state income taxes for the wages they earn in out-of-state teams that are subject to. So if a Houston Rocket plays in California, he's subject for that game to California income taxes. So we wanted to analyze and say, how much is a player really going to save by being in California versus Texas? Next slide. So we did this. Now, I'm sorry about these analyses, but what it is, we deal directly on cash flow. So you pay the income taxes in the state of Texas, you pay the income tax in the state of California. We did an analysis of a player that would make approximately $11.5 million a year on a 5-year contract over 5 years, okay? And what would be the tax savings that the player would have over the 5-year period? Well, this analysis, and you can see the chart, so we have a lot of, you can see everything has been taken into consideration that could possibly be taken into consideration, including out of game, such as if you're Houston Rocket and you're playing in California, you do pay a California tax. So we taken the rosters of 2 teams, did identical, and we prepared this net cash flow. And if you can see by the final number in the last column, there's approximately $3.3 million of tax savings over the 5-year contract for a player to play in the state of Texas, Florida, versus California. And if you say, well, listen, that's only $648 or was that $650,000 per year to a guy that's making $11.5 million, that should not be a lot of money. Well, if you look at the net cash flow, it's roughly 10% of each annual paycheck. And if you take it over the 5 years, it's $3.2 million. And so what you have here in this formula is roughly a half a year's net cash from a salary playing in a taxable state to playing in a state that does not have an income tax. So we have seen a tremendous amount of teams in the states trying to negotiate contracts by using the state tax advantage, like Texas over California, in obtaining a player to move them there. And we've seen some success this year. And then we've had other sports teams that have been in taxable states saying, hey, we know that Daryl Morey's sniffing our players, and we know that Miami's trying to get them. Show us what we got to pay them in the state to give them the state net cash that they would receive if they played in Texas. So we're working a lot with teams now in all the leagues to do what's called a gross-up analysis to say, you got to pay this person this amount of money in order for him to be in the same position as if he was playing in Texas or Florida. So we're seeing a tremendous amount of that. We also have been strong advocates in looking at players' financial planning. And you know, the NFL has made an effort, you know, and NFL players have sometimes a very short career, in trying to educate players on their personal finances. And other leagues and other players' unions should start taking a look at the situation going on, because it's very important and it's very upsetting to us to see a list that we do see that I presented earlier of some of these substantial legends not being able to survive after their league career. And one of the things that is really out of the box and saying is that players, agents, should really look at the possibility of setting up captive insurance companies for their players. This is a new, edgy type of idea that small businesses have been using, large businesses have been using for self-insurance. And the development of insurance over the few years, we're seeing a tremendous amount of success with the Internal Revenue Service in recent rulings that small captives, large captives, you could insure intangibles such as a goodwill and brand of a player. So for instance, if a player is a professional basketball player, NBA, has a company such as an S corporation, that person could set up his own captive to ensure the going concern of the brand. So if this player is, I'm going to use a name that's no longer playing and no longer exists, is Lou Alcindor, and if Lou Alcindor was a player and he's in today's leagues and he's receiving a wage from the W-2, he could set up another business corporation, S corporation partnership that would run his branding together. And there's one provision, there's something called the small captive provisions, which said that a person, okay, a business entity, in an ordinary necessary business expense, could put up to $1.2 million into a captive insurance company. And there's more technical, we won't get into I had a elongated speech on captives, but I'm shortening it down. But was to where a player could allow to be put up to $1.2 million a year aside and be able to make claims against his own captive insurance company once his brand is diminished. This is very new, it's very edgy. I think it's a good thing that people should be looking at. Small businesses are looking at it. It is becoming a phenomenon. The state of Vermont has had a captive laws in the state, and they have substantially formed over 1,000 in the last year of captive insurance companies. Delaware has adopted the captive provisions. New Jersey, and I implore any athlete or any coach or any friend of theirs, or even advisor, take a look at the captive provisions, talk to some insurance experts, and try to put aside. And I use this very classic situation. If a player has $1.2 million in taxable income, and he could manage the cash flow from not putting this aside, and he funds a captive, he doubled his money in one day. Because what he's done is he's had $1.2 million, he'd take a 50% tax rate, he would net $600,000, and if he funds the $1.2 million into his captive, he has $1.2 million, so he doubled his money just by funding his captive. And I see it as a very important mechanism that could help preserve some of the professional athletes that are having the financial difficulties by having these self-insurance companies managed by professional investors and paying out when their brand is diminished in their career. So I will open up if anybody has any questions. I'd be glad to answer them.
So in the NBA where they cap max contracts, have the players tried to do anything about this? Because it seems ridiculous that if LeBron James is traded, his value, what you're saying is because of how he's paid, his value changes just based on where he goes. And so that's remarkable to me that it's so significant over a 5-year period.
Well, you've seen that. I believe, and I don't know the actual details of the structure, but you saw when Miami had the LeBron James change to Miami, how everybody took a pay cut. And I haven't done an analysis of that, but I would take a look at that and see, did they really take a pay cut? Okay, because when they moved from Ohio and he moved down to Florida, what was his net cash flow difference? I think if you do the analysis, there would be a significant, you'd be almost very close to what he was getting paid under his salary today. But I have not done that analysis.
I guess continuing along that line, an alternative way to think about it would be to think about cost of living adjustments and tax adjustments on salary caps. Do you know if any of the leagues are thinking about that as a way of addressing the issue that was just raised?
Well, I don't think so. I don't know if anybody from the NBA is in a room and addressing that issue, but I think they stay out of that issue. They have their other. It's funny, I'm an income tax guy, and income taxes are always secondary in people's discussions, and the economics of them seem to always pass to be personal. So I don't think any of the NBA have looked at the tax burden of any of the players to find out how they're going to put it aside. Or even, if you're looking at a large market team, if you're looking at Miami has all that. They're in a great market, and they have no income tax. Same thing with the Mavericks in Houston. It's the people that are sitting up in Milwaukee that have the problems. High tax states, low markets, and it's hard for them to give the players the incentive to come up there because they have a tax and, a smaller market. So maybe the NBA will address that somehow, but I don't think they ever will consider income tax as an alternative. I think it's something you have to deal with.
Have you guys looked at all about international play, like especially maybe in the NHL, Canadian teams, implications of Canadian tax law relative to the U.S.?
Well, it matters where the player resides and, what his side is. I know that, in my career, And when you have, and I've done a lot of rock and roll groups over the years, and which has always been kind of fun in some ways. But you know, the worst nightmare is to sit home and have somebody call you up and say, hey, guess what? I just got my green card. Okay? To an accountant, that's like a financial nightmare, because once you get a green card as an athlete, you're subject to worldwide taxation in the United States. The United States is one of the only countries in the world, and England's trying to move that way a little bit, okay, to tax their green cards, their citizens, and residents on their worldwide taxation. So if he resides in the United States, even if he's Canadian, you know, he's subject to U.S. taxation. If he lives in Canada and he's Canadian, they have a reciprocal treaty for credits between each of the states. You don't get dollar to dollar, but it's close enough to go through that. But you know, it's amazing how many people go get green cards and they're proud of it. Okay, once you get a green card, you can't give it up. So it's almost a death tax if you give it up now. So it becomes they move out of the United States. You're a Russian. You're playing here. You get a green card. You decide to go back to Moscow. Well, the IRS could chase you for the rest of your life. So you know, we caution people of being, you know, out there. And then the other thing is how we used to in the older days. We used to have these rock and roll tours, and you know, the states always collect their money at the gate, so they always have a guy. But you know, we spend a lot of time trying to get people back out of the country, try to meet that 160, 180-day rules, and just let's get out of here. We've had a whole tour. You know, one time I had a client get subject to over $2.5 million because we had a thunderstorm and couldn't fly out on time. So the most expensive plane flight in the history of rock and roll. Okay? So I appreciate it. If there's any other questions, I thank you again for listening to me. And if you have any questions, I'm open to speak privately if you want to. Thank you.